Okay, welcome back. My guest is Jeffrey Schaler, and we're talking about his book, Addiction is a Choice, which I believe is excellent. Everyone knows somebody who's convinced themselves they have a disease, and they need to hear and read this book. This is a keeper, one you're going to want to keep in your library. I know I won't even lend my copy out. Jeff, before the break, I said I had a Lollapalooza question for you. I do kind of life coaching and counseling for people too, and I have this couple, both of them very highly sexed. The man believes that he's a sex addict, so he goes to sex addiction meetings, which are very similar to AA. The woman doesn't believe she has a sex addiction. She just believes she has a healthy sexual appetite.
Right.
And, back in my day, a man like that would have been considered a stud. But today, if you have sex more than twice a week, I guess you're a freak. Is sex addiction real?
If by addiction you mean the person cannot control his or her behavior,
Yes.
it is not real. It's a myth. And, everything that Masters and Johnson talked about was a bunch of nonsense. It's just amazing how they developed something sexually titillating and called it medical treatment for a medical disease. This was nonsense. And my good colleague, Thomas Zoss, psychiatrist who just died 2 years ago, wrote a book taking them apart, gene by gene, in his book, Sex by Prescription. There is no such thing as an involuntary behavior. That's what it boils down to, Maria. So when people say to me, and students have said, is this a disease? Is this behavior a disease? I say, is it a behavior that you're talking about? And they said, yes. And I said, well, then is there such a thing as an involuntary behavior? Remember, we've talked about that?
Right.
And they said, I guess not, because there is no such thing as an involuntary behavior. What people call an involuntary behavior is a seizure. When you go to the doctor and you get a knee reflex, that's a reflex action. It's not a behavior. There's no volition involved. But how can you go and get sex, drinks, drugs, as if you're having a convulsion?
Right,
Doesn't make any sense.
Right, unless,
Makes
of
no
course.
sense at all.
Unless, of
If you were
course,
driving down the road and you had a seizure from a disease called epilepsy, and you killed someone, of course we wouldn't hold you responsible.
Right.
Because, you couldn't do anything about that. Actually, what happens, though, is a judge would say, you've got epilepsy, now it's your responsibility to take your medicine if you want to drive. And if you don't take your medicine and have another seizure and harm somebody, now we're going to hold you to a higher standard of responsibility. So, we have to differentiate between seizures and voluntary behaviors, and there just is no such thing. I challenge anybody to tell me a behavior that is involuntary.
Right.
This has serious implications for law and criminal responsibility.
Well, that's the other thing. No one wants to take responsibility. Not from our top leaders all the way down to, the bum on the street.
I don't know. I mean, I had a guy who came for counseling years ago, and he said that he thought he masturbated too much. And I said, what's too much?
Right.
I don't know. Is it twice a day too much? Is it 20 times? It's a problem if it interferes with other aspects of your life.
Right.
And but that doesn't make it a disease, and that also doesn't make it something you can't control.
No, and I would assume
You have an obligation as an adult to find a way to control your behavior.
Right. Well, I would say at least he has a healthy prostate. You can always look at the good side of everything.
Exactly.
Look, I have a very good sense of humor. You have to do what I do. Is there a difference between addiction and a habit?
I really don't see the two as different, because a habit is something that we find meaning in engaging in, and I don't know what is too much or too little. There's no clear line that says now your behavior you've repeated it so much that it's become a habit, and now you're repeating it so much it's become an addiction. The two are really the same. addiction originally, and the earliest use I could find was in the Bible in the 16th century, it meant devotion. The idea that addiction had anything to do with disease or uncontrollable behavior came about as a result of alcohol prohibition in the 1920s. But before that, people used the word addiction to mean devotion. And the root word is dicere, which means to say, to give consent. It shares the same root as abdication, dictator, dictation, all these words. It has, it means that you want to do something. Now, I can't tell you what the difference between that is and a habit. It seems to me that they're the same. We may make judgments and say, if your habit is socially unacceptable, we're going to call that an addiction. And if it's socially acceptable, then we're going to say it's a habit.
Well, it's kind of like
artificial distinction.
Right, it's like drinking. If you look at drinking being acceptable, I mean, it gets celebratized in our world. You have ads for, alcohol, for beer, people at a baseball game with their beers in their hand, or you watch Mad Men, forget about it. Everybody's drinking, and that's how it was, because I worked that world at that same time. Right. There's a sexing up of alcohol and a demonization of marijuana going on at the same time.
That's right. And that is really an artificial distinction there. I mean, they're good drugs, they're bad drugs, but these are just inventions that people in power make.
Well, I've read your book, but so a lot of these questions I'm asking you, I know the answer, but I know my listeners don't. So I don't want you to think, oh, what a silly question. Maria said she read the book.
No, what you're asking is very important.
You make it very clear. You had a story in the book of a lady that came to you, and I actually repeated it somewhat to my friends this weekend. She came to you, she's in a miserable marriage, hates her job, hates her life. And when you suggest taking responsibility, changing your life, it seemed like that wasn't good enough, so she needed to go on Prozac. It's a very typical story for a lot of people. Well, I'm just going to take this drug for a little while until I feel better, but they don't change their life.
Exactly.
So don't you think that that's really showing a lack of courage to be dependent on a drug instead of depending on your own self and your will and your strength to do something about it?
I agree with you, Maria. Yes. And what concerns me even more is that people start feeling good in a bad situation. In the story I talked about in the book, this woman needed to get a job, needed to leave her husband, needed to go back to school to change her life. She went for a regular physical. The doctor saw that she was very depressed, prescribed Prozac, and lo and behold, she felt better. Now, where is the motivation now to change her behavior?
There isn't, because she's like a zombie. They're zombied out when they're on those drugs.
Exactly. I mean, if we look back, everybody looks back on their life. Every important major change in their life was based on some experience of discomfort. That's not the same thing as going out and trying to create pain for yourself. But when you realize that you're really unhappy in a relationship, you've got to change your behavior somehow.
Right.
And taking a drug, whether it's cocaine or heroin or Prozac or Cymbalta or whatever, there really isn't any difference.
Right.
You're numbing out your feelings. One is socially acceptable because of who prescribes it.
Well, that's what I say. When people have jobs and say they want to come home at night and they want to smoke a joint, well, they can't because they get drug tested. But they don't test for people being on Prozac, Wellbutrin, all these deadly medications that can make them want to commit murder on the job. Instead, they're worried about whether you're smoking a joint, which the only thing you're going to attack after that is the refrigerator.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
So to me, when I see these signs, I remember one day walking outside a Home Depot, and I was walking in with one of my friends, and they had a sign, now hiring, and we do drug tests. And I looked at that, and I said, you'd have to be on drugs to want to work a job like this.
Right.
To me, that would be the only way I could deal with that kind of mundane day. But the hypocrisy is off the charts. It's like the government says, if you use the drugs we're making money on, you're not going to jail. But if you use the ones we haven't figured out how to make money on, you know, you're going to jail. You know what I'm saying? It's just ridiculous.
You've got it exactly right, Maria.
All right, but people tell me I'm crazy. You know, I don't know. To me, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to see the truth in all of this.
Right, and I think much of it is common sense. That's what I tell my students. I also tell them, I mean, I've been a teacher in college for 22 years, and I say, don't believe anything I say. Think about these things. Mm-hmm. Think about the logic here and whether this makes sense. You come to your own conclusions on this.
Right.
And don't believe what somebody says just because he has an MD or a Ph.D. Mm-hmm. Think about what this means.
Right.
And, there's one thing that really flips people out, and I say to them, there's no such thing as a safe or dangerous, good or bad drug. It all depends on how you use the drug. Mm-hmm. You know, even some poisons in tiny amounts are used to keep as insecticides. Mm-hmm. There are all kinds of drugs that are used in varying potencies. Look, if you want to commit suicide, you want to do it in the most painless, easiest way to do it. And in that sense, morphine would be considered a very good drug. Actually, in Canada, heroin is prescribed for terminal illness, because it's more effective than morphine. In the United States, it's forbidden. Why? Because even if you have a terminal disease, you might get addicted to heroin.
Yeah, but you're dying. Listen, my sister, you know, God rest her soul, my sister was 3 days from death in a hospital in Florida. She had a very rare disease called amyloidosis, where it's always fatal. And 3 days before, they wouldn't up her pain medication.
Right.
And I grabbed the doctor in the hall, and because he now, 3 days before she dies, wants to give her chemotherapy, which of course would be useless. And I said to him, why would you give her chemotherapy? You're going to tell me that's going to save her life? I said, you know, I'm not Ben Casey, but even I know she's dying, you know?
Right.
And he says, well, it's all we have. I said, no, it isn't. I said, she needs more drugs. Give her painkillers. I says, the chance of her becoming a drug addict 3 days before she dies is pretty stupid if that's the reason why you're not giving it to her.
That's exactly right. There are all kinds of myths that come about with pain drugs.
Well, I got the drugs for her. Believe me, I got the drugs for her in like 5 minutes. I was like Shirley MacLaine in terms of endearment. So they probably wanted to drug my ass out while I was there.
No, I understand exactly what you mean. And, you know, this crazy idea about narcotic drugs, which actually, when taken appropriately, are relatively safe. Mm-hmm. The only way people die is if they take too much. Right. But people can stay on methadone. And I'll tell you about something about myself. 12 years ago, I had major spine surgery, which it went wrong. The doctor took out too much bone, and I have been in horrible pain for the last 12 years. I mean, I told my wife and I told my daughter, and even my doctor, I said, I may have to commit suicide on this. I cannot take this. This is too much. They put me on methadone, and the pain has been much, much better. I've been able to work and write. There's no high associated with it. And as I've changed my lifestyle in the last year, I've noticed that I have over 100 to 200 pills left over when I'm supposed to get my prescription refilled.
That's great.
I completely forget about getting more pills because it's something I don't think about. Mm-hmm. I realize, my God, my back is getting better. I have no desire to take the pills, and I'm not addicted to them in that sense. Now, you can, and any drug, produce some withdrawal symptoms, which can be uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But the majority, especially you've been on it for 12 years, daily, but most people who are in the hospital and are on morphine for a week or two, and then they don't need it anymore, they have no trouble giving up morphine. Mm-hmm. Talk to pain doctors.
Right.
They've told me this over and over again. It's just they've made this the boogeyman.
Right.
And unfortunately, in third world countries, it's even worse. They just let people commit suicide or just die writhing in pain on the ground. They will not let them have any kind of narcotic drug.
Look,
my
thoughts on Jack Kevorkian was he should have got the Nobel Prize.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Because if you look at quality of life, and that matters. And no one, medicine, unfortunately, is keeping people alive too long, longer than they want to be alive. You're just a shell of a person, or you're sitting there with Alzheimer's. That's not a future that I would want for myself or anybody I love.
You're so right, Maria. You are so right.
Now, when you say you change
quantity
right.
versus quality.
Exactly. Look, my lifestyle is very active. I go to the gym 6 days a week. I eat an organic vegan diet. I'm not on any medications. I'm 64 years old. I have the strength and the body of a 30-year-old. I'm happy. I keep my mind busy. I'm engaged in what I do. All these things are important. The human body doesn't really need much more. So I'm curious, how did you change your lifestyle? What changed?
I started walking and went a little bit farther each day. Mm-hmm. I changed the distance that I had to drive to school 5 days a week. And what else? And I lost weight, and I spent time writing, which I had stopped doing. Mm-hmm. Although writing can be tricky because you end up sitting too long.
Right.
But going outside, walking my dog, not driving as much as I used to. I have to be careful because my spine is so fragile that they don't even want me to do yoga because they're afraid something's going to break down again.
Well, yoga is just good stretching,
It is.
But you took responsibility.
I did martial arts, I did endurance sporting events, all of that stuff. But I decided, too, that I didn't have to push myself to the limit, that I could say, this is good enough, and would give myself a break, and that's what helped me more than anything.
Oh, that's great. You took responsibility. You didn't just depend on the medical community.
Exactly. And I have a wonderful relationship with my doctor, but I don't depend on him other than when I need to get a medication, he gives me the medication, and he trusts me.
Well, I can tell you I have a friend who is my age, and she was on about 6 different pain pills. She had the same kind of severe back surgeries and pain constantly. Right. She couldn't even climb 2 steps. And I had suggested to her, instead of all those drugs and even a pain patch, which I didn't even know, all this stuff, she was like, she acted like she was a zombie most of the time.
Right.
Because medical marijuana became legal in Arizona. I suggested she check it out. And she was blown away by it. Her doctor recommended it. And she's pretty much pain-free.
Well, that's good to hear.
So that's something, everybody should check out, okay? Because like I always say, if it's a plant, use it. If it comes from a plant, don't use it. We only have 2 minutes left, but I did want to cover, I think the solution, if we want to use the word solution, that I got out of your book, to not be an addict, okay, is whatever problems you're having in life need to be addressed.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's the point of the whole book. Don't look at the drug. Look at how you live your life and what you don't want to look at. It's the introspection, and you've got to honestly search your heart and your own lifestyle and take responsibility for it. That's going to be the best therapy than anything. I mean, when people come to me for help with drugs and alcohol, I don't focus on their drug and alcohol use. I focus on how they're living their life. And then 6 months later, I say, how's the drinking and drug use? And they said, I don't even do it anymore. I've been focused on these other issues, changing my life.
That's great. Well, I want to give out your website. It's Schaler, SCHALER.net. Of course, it's right here. It's highlighted. Just click through and check out his work because I really think he's going to give you a whole different perspective on what you've been thinking about psychology, addiction, so many different things. Jeffrey, I want to thank you so much, and keep me on your list when your new book comes out.
I certainly will. Thank you so much, Meria. You're a terrific host.
Oh, thanks so much. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Jeffrey Schaler, pretty damn good. Anyway, tomorrow I'll be back with the blasted news, and that's Meria.net, Meria.net. And I hope you learned something today, and I hope that you feel better about yourself or whatever issues you're going through. Don't let them label you. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you for listening and supporting The Meria Show. Tell others what you learned today. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it's shared. Encourage others to subscribe today. www.meria.net. Often imitated, never duplicated. A world of information all in one place. www.meria.net. Always ahead of the curve. Always on your side. Get active or get radioactive. Subscribe today.